Okay, so thanks again to everybody for joining us today in the WLN webinar, Writing the Tutors Column, from Submitting to Revising. We have actually quite an international group of people registered for this webinar. We have tutors and administrators from Russia, Indonesia, Canada, United Arab Emirates, and even Poland. So welcome everybody, all the international people included. We'll be covering a great deal of information today, but don't worry if you feel a little bit overwhelmed or that you might be missing something. As you know, we are recording the session and you will have an opportunity to rewatch it and maybe pause it or slow it down as you wish to get that information again. That video recording will be available through the WLN blog, so watch out for the announcement on the blog or through the WC listserv. So we're also using the chat tool. I know some of you guys already found it useful in terms of reaching out to us. So that is the tool that we're going to be using for question and answers for all those who are participating. And you can ask us questions as we're talking, and we'll get to it at the end of our presentation. And just another note that all questions will be reviewed, so we'll be happy to answer that as at the end of our presentation. Now, to introduce ourselves, my name is Dr. Sohui Lee. I'm the Assistant Director and Faculty Director, Assistant Professor and Faculty Director of the Writing and Multiliteracy Center at the California State University, Channel Islands.
And I'm Elizabeth Kleinfeld. I direct the Writing Center and am English Professor at Metropolitan State University of Denver.
And finally, I'm Julie Prebel. I'm an Associate Professor and Writing Programs Director and Writing Center Director at Occidental College, a small liberal arts college in Los Angeles. And I just want to say that this is the first day that I've had a voice in 7 days. So I apologize if my voice slips in and out. I'll do my best.
Okay, so this workshop is dedicated to helping student writers compose and submit a manuscript for WLN's Tutors Column. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with the Tutors Column, the topics covered in the Tutors Column are Writing Center or Multiliteracy Center focus, but with a twist. The articles are written by and for fellow tutors. So the topics should address issues that are important and relevant to most Writing Center tutors. When you read the titles of the Tutors Columns, you'll see that they deal with topics such as research and writing, tutor practices, or diversity awareness. Elizabeth and Julie will delve into these topics in more detail later. Authors should also be aware that the manuscripts for the Tutors Column are also peer-reviewed, and this means that leading scholars in the field who are part of WLN's editorial board are asked to provide anonymous feedback and recommend whether or not it is appropriate for publication and what revisions may be needed. So here's a roadmap of what we'll be covering today. First, we'll discuss the nuts and bolts of the Tutors Column as well as the journal submission process. Second, we'll briefly review how to do research and the research expectation for the Tutors Column. Third, we'll provide suggestions for structure and look at some examples. Fourthly, we'll cover what you can expect from a reviewer's feedback. At the end of our presentation, we'll have time to respond to your questions through the chat tool. Elizabeth will be speaking next now, going over the nuts and bolts of the Tutors Column.
So when you're considering whether an essay that you're working on is appropriate for WLN, the first thing you should do is carefully consider whether it meets the requirements listed on the WLN website for submissions. I want to review 7 attributes the website mentions that are relevant to submissions for the Tutors Column. The first is that the piece must focus on Writing Center work. WLN is interested in manuscripts that look at writing centers in a variety of different types of institutions. This means that pieces on classroom theory and other non-writing center topics are more appropriately sent to other journals. Secondly, there's no need to assume that you have to be the sole author. In fact, WLN routinely publishes work that is collaboratively authored. So think about having a classmate or Writing Center colleague collaborate with you. Third, Editors are really strict about observing the word limit for pieces. So a tutor's column needs to be 1,500 words or fewer, and that includes the works cited and endnotes, and it needs to be in MLA format. And if you're not familiar, it says MS there, that means manuscript. Fourth, submissions should demonstrate some level of writing center experience as opposed to theoretical programs, policies, or solutions that have been thought about but never actually tested in real writing center settings. So in other words, you should be writing about your actual experience in a writing center. WLN reaches a wide audience of both new and experienced writing center practitioners. So you want to be sure that your submission has something to offer both new tutors and tutors with experience. This might mean offering a strategy a new tutor could immediately implement, as well as some discussion of more complicated situations in which the strategy might need more nuance, and that might appeal to more experienced tutors. You'll also want to avoid jargon and terms that may not be familiar to new tutors. And submissions need to offer new insights, experience, or research. So they have to go beyond primarily repeating what is already known. As an author, you can only know what is already known by reading about your topic in writing center literature and using the literature as a taking off point for your own work. And this leads me to the last item on the list, which is to indicate awareness of existing scholarship. This generally means explicitly mentioning how your work builds on the work of others, citing other scholarship on the topic. And citations should be referring to recent sources most of the time. I hope the list of manuscript requirements makes it clear that unrevised conference presentations, course papers, or seminar papers should not be submitted without significant revision. As this slide shows, a typical tutor's column differs significantly from a successful course paper, even if the ideas are similar, and even if you got an A+++ on the course paper. It's totally possible to revise a course paper into a tutor's column, but the revisions will probably be significant. Tutors who are sending essays for the tutor's column are encouraged to discuss how to write a successful essay for publication, which is different from a successful class paper, with their directors. And directors love to support their tutors in these types of revisions. But keep in mind, these are really two very different genres. The tutor's column and the course paper are completely different genres. I want to note that Leanne Glausensky, who's the editor for the Tutors column, has specifically noted that she would love to see more diversity in the authorship of Tutors columns, alongside an engagement with topics of concern and interest to diverse populations, including international audiences. The Tutors column is a safe space where authors can work through complicated ideas like gender, pronoun use, racial identity, accessibility, neurodiversity, disability, and so forth. If we think of the Tutors column as a place where future names in the field can get their start, then the Tutors column is also a way for new authors to figure out what matters to them and the kind of impact they want to make on the field of writing center studies. I want to show you how these 7 attributes play out in one particular Tutors column. Julie's going to discuss this same Tutors column in terms of its structure and development in more detail. So I'm just going to kind of zip through it to highlight that this column does feature all of those 7 attributes that I mentioned. So first, you can see that it focuses on writing center work at a university. It is written by a single author, although it would be totally okay for it to be collaboratively written. We don't have time now to count the words, so just trust me that it's under 1,500 words. And if you're having trust issues, you can go to the WLN online archive, track down this Tutors column, and count the words yourself. It engages with authentic real-world writing center experience. The author relies on 2 specific real-life examples from her tutoring in the writing center. And then after these 2 well-developed examples, she offers the insight gleaned from the experiences she had with those 2 students. Hold on, I don't know if you all are seeing the husky puppy alert that just came up on my screen. I just got rid of it. They were very cute. You gotta take a break for the husky puppies. Okay, so we had the 2 well-developed examples, and then she offers the insight gleaned from the experiences that she had with those 2 students. And then finally, the author indicates awareness of existing scholarship. And then she later brings in another source, so bringing in more of the existing scholarship. And then, of course, both of those sources are listed in an MLA format works cited list at the end. So while not every tutor's column is going to cite sources, the column is always grounded in a larger scholarly conversation, which means that even if the author doesn't cite sources, they're indicating an awareness that they're participating in a larger conversation. And because it can be daunting for newer authors to really understand and know what already has been said in the conversation, we thought it would be useful to talk about some specific ways to find out what has already been said. So what I'm going to do is really quickly demonstrate for you on 3 different search engines how to find out what has been said in Writing Center studies on a particular topic. And you'll see that each of these different strategies that I'm going to show you yields a slightly different result because they're using slightly different algorithms for determining results. So first I'm going to show you the WLN archive, which has all the volumes of WLN from 1976 to the present. So they're all available and searchable. So to use this website, you would go to the WLN website, and there's the URL. And then you would click on archives over here, and then the entire searchable archive will pop up. There it is. So if you know the volume and issue for the article you're looking for, you can just go directly to that volume and issue. Otherwise, if you don't, you can go to the search box. There's the search box. So I'm just going to do a sample search on listening. So I type listening into the search box, and then the results come up in a really long column, and just to fit it on the slide, I divided the column in 2. So you're seeing 2 columns, but there's really just one long column of results that pop up. And because this is the WLN archive, all of the results are limited to articles on listening that have been published in WLN, and only WLN. So the next search option that I'm going to show you is Compile. Compile is a search engine specific to journals in writing and composition. So it has access to articles from WLN from February 2000 to the present, and then it also searches any other journal that is associated with writing, rhetoric, and composition. So this is a quirky and specific enough database that it has its own set of search tips, which I've got the red arrow pointing towards it. There's some quirky protocols, and if you just try to kind of blunder in here thinking that it works just like Google, you're going to get really frustrated. So read the search tips if you want to use Compile. There's also a glossary, and the glossary tells you exactly which terms to use to look up certain things. So for example, if I want to look up listening and writing centers, I don't type in the terms listening and writing centers. I type in the terms listening, and then instead of writing centers, it wants me to use W center. And I only learned that because I looked it up in the glossary. So that's one of the tricky, quirky things. So then when I type in listening and W center, it calls up a list of all the things that have been published in all the wide variety of journals that it's looking at. So you click on search, and you can see there's a column that says journal, and you'll see that there's only one, or there's several WLN articles that come up, but the first one that comes up is from the Writing Center Journal. The really cool thing about Compile is that you can click on any of the column headings and sort by that column heading. So if I wanted to sort by data publication or by journal or by author, I could do that really easily using Compile. And then the last one that I want to show you is Google Scholar. Google Scholar, what I recommend doing is using an advanced search, because then you can narrow it down to particular journals that are connected to Writing Center studies if you want. So I'm going to, if I put in listening and narrow it down to WLN, you can see the results that pop up. So it is limiting things just to WLN. It does sort things by what they call relevance, and that's in like quotation marks, because Google doesn't tell us exactly what their algorithm is. It's undisclosed. So how they determine relevance is a little bit of a mystery. So if you compare the results of all 3 of those search strategies, you can see that there's only one article that comes up in all 3 of the search results. And that is the article called Listening into the Writing Center by Tracy Santa. So what we suggest that you do is that you try all three of these options and see what comes up. And that way you're getting a broader look at what's been said on your research topic. And so now I am going to turn things over to Julie and hope that her voice holds out.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so we're going to, now that Elizabeth's talked to you about some of the nuts and bolts of publishing in WLN and how to do some research to prepare your article for WLN, we're going to consider some of the more common types of tutor columns in WLN. And this is not to say that only certain topics are published in the journal, but instead in this segment, we're going to focus on some of the more commonly used organizational strategies in Tutors Column articles. We'll walk through some examples, and these examples are the same that Sohui and Elizabeth are using in their parts of the presentation, and we'll consider how the articles are structured to convey the writer's arguments. So looking at how other writers who are published structure and organize their articles can help you when you're considering how to structure and organize your own ideas in your article. So we'll go to the first example.
Which I'm trying to go to, but for some reason it's not going.
We got frozen.
Yeah. Hold on, we're having a little, oh, there it is.
Technical difficulties. Okay. Always happens, by the way. This first article illustrates one of the most common approaches for organizing ideas in a successful WLN tutors column. The parts of this article may seem more familiar and similar to the structure of an expository essay. And these parts include an introduction section followed by a thesis or main argument, several body paragraphs, and a conclusion, as we'll look at in the slides that follow. The writer begins with an introductory paragraph to introduce the topic, in this case, information resources for tutors, and then provides a context paragraph to explain their more specific focus on this topic. How their writing center sees many students from a media writing program, and how the center does not have enough tutors to, quote, pair with every writer who visits the center. As we see early in this article, the writer proposes a solution to the problem of how to meet the needs of student writers who visit the center, developing a set of resources. We'll return to the model of problem and pose a solution in just a few slides too. It may be helpful to note that unlike a conventional expository essay written for a class, where a thesis is expected at the end of the first introduction paragraph, in this article, the author's main focus or thesis emerges in the fourth paragraph, after the introduction of the topic and greater context about the types of resources needed in the tutor's writing center. This article illustrates a structure common in successful WLN tutors column articles. Following the introduction and focus of the main argument, the article proceeds to identify a problem: tutors not using resource documents when working with writers. Then the author identifies a solution to the problem, or the author's intervention, which was to conduct a focus group with the Writing Center tutors to address ways to use resources. Finally, the author concludes her article with a set of recommendations or guidelines, as she calls them, that other writing centers might find helpful when developing supporting resources to use. This last rhetorical move is one that WLN especially values, as we are a journal that seeks to engage in practical dialogue across writing centers and share information with each other. We'll now move on to a second example of a successful WLN tutors column. Similar to the first example, in this tutors column, the author opens her article with an immediate focus on the main topic. In this case, how a tutor's identities can impact the dynamics of a consultation. This article is structured through the explication of a case study. The author's experiences working with two students who are second language writers, and how a critical awareness of identity, as the author says, intersected with the usual work of a writing center session. Many WLN tutors column articles use a similar approach, where the description of working with specific students serves as a case study to illustrate the points of the argument. One of the features that makes this article especially compelling and convincing is that the author presents two examples in counterpoint in her case study related to her topic of tutor identity. After the first example, where the author explains how engaging with Gina, the first student, through shared experiences of identity strengthened their work together in their session, the author discusses her work with Kaylee and how her sessions with Kaylee required a different approach. As shown in this article, the use of a counterexample can help to expand your argument and make it more complex, and may provide more points of connection for your readers and their own tutoring experiences. After presenting the case study of working with two students, the author concludes by reinforcing their main focus on tutors' identities and how identities inevitably have an impact on their interactions with students. In terms of a bigger picture takeaway suggestion for other tutors, the author reminds readers that tutors need to remember to center the expressed needs of the writers with whom they work to show that there is not a singular approach to working with students. We're on to the third and final sample of structure in a WLN article. And this final example also draws on the tutor's experiences working in a writing center, but follows a somewhat less conventional structure. In this final example, the writer begins with an introduction that identifies the broader topic their article considers and a common feature of rhetorical writing, audience awareness. The writer situates the topic of audience awareness in two ways. One, the ways tutors use audience awareness in their sessions, and two, the way the writer recognized the need for greater audience awareness when submitting and later revising an article for WLN. Similar to the first two articles, the author then includes a context or background paragraph to explain the greater so what of their topic, the importance of revisiting their article after deeper reflection on the topic, and the flaws in the argument and original case study. The author's brief discussion of their first unsuccessful WLN submission is a jumping off point for their main purpose in this article, as we'll see in the next slide. After the author's setup of the focus and topic, the majority of this article is a list of lessons learned. The lessons learned section functions both as the author's evidence for the argument they make about why it is important to develop audience awareness, in this case to make sure your article meets the criteria for publication in WLN, and also functions as a list of suggestions for other tutors who want to publish. These three examples illustrate different approaches to structuring a WLN Tutors Column article, and thus reinforce our point that there's no one way to organize your ideas for a successful article. However, all three articles do show similarities or common threads in what the authors include as the parts of their articles. All of the articles have a clear main focus, which they introduce immediately. The authors connect their topic to a greater so what. They provide evidence in the form of direct experiences and relevant scholarship. They make concrete connections between their experiences and their topic, and they conclude with a set of suggestions, guidelines, or lessons learned that might be useful to other writing centers and tutors. We recommend that you take time before you submit and finalize your own article to review several Tutors Column articles for ideas on organizational strategies and how to make sure that you include all the necessary parts for a successful and publishable article. And now I'm turning it over to Sohui, who will talk a little bit more about manuscript review process.
Hi again. So I'll be briefly explaining the manuscript review process for the Tutors Column and WLN. All submissions to the Tutors Columns are first reviewed by the editor-in-chief. She then shares it with the rest of the editorial team. But occasionally, manuscripts might be sent back to the authors at this early stage for what they call revision before review. That's before it gets sent on to the reviewers. And this happens because the editors know that the manuscript will very likely be rejected in the peer review process because one, the manuscript does not appear to be a good fit. Two, there are flaws in the design of the study. And three, the manuscript fails to answer any sort of the so what question, which Julie has previously discussed. So when it goes back to the author, usually the editor-in-chief provides some very specific suggestions to fix some of these major problems. If the manuscript seems to be a potential fit for the journal, it is stripped of any identifying markers so that it is anonymous. Then it is sent to academics and professionals working in the Writing Center field. And this is the peer, part of peer review. Usually these reviewers are invited to be on the editorial review board because they have been previously published in the journal and they know its rigor, expectations, and audience, and or they are well-established leaders in their field. So as with most reviewers of journals, reviewers for the Tutors column will probably address the following basic questions. 1, is the manuscript suitable for publication in the journal? That means, would the tutors reading the Tutors column find the topic or issues relevant to them? Is the level of research, analysis, method, or writing appropriate and adequate for the Tutors column? And then 2, does the manuscript present or offer new perspectives for tutors? So after evaluating the manuscript, the reviewers are asked to make a recommendation. Usually they select one of 4 categories for recommendation: publish, publish with minor revisions, revise and resubmit, and reject. And you can see here in red, most submissions fall under the revise and resubmit category. The reviewers return the manuscript to the editor, who will then summarize reviewers' feedback and pass it back to the author along with the manuscript. It is important to note that the Tutors column manuscript usually undergo multiple rounds of revisions in response to reviewers' feedback. Elizabeth will be providing an example of how these rounds of feedback might happen.
So I'm going to share with you some email correspondence between Gaelen Hall, who is a tutor that submitted a manuscript for consideration for the Tutors column, and Ted Rogenbuck, who is one of the 2 co-editors of the journal. So Gaelen initially emailed Muriel Harris, who's the editor-in-chief, in October of 2018 and began a conversation with her about an idea that he had for a Tutors column, and she encouraged him to actually write a draft and submit something. So he submitted that around the end of October or beginning of November 2018. The manuscript was then sent out for review by 2 members of the editorial board, and here in a January email, Ted is explaining that it's a revise and resubmit, and he says the reviews are in, they're asking for substantial revision, and he suggests a March 18th deadline. Then just a couple days later, Gaelen emails back. He's thrilled that he got a revise and resubmit. As Sohui mentioned, that's the most typical response. And I want to highlight that last paragraph. He says, thank you for being so supportive in the revision process. And that's something that WLN really prides itself on. So that's why we're really excited to be talking to you today about the Tutors column, because this is a really great supportive way to kind of dip your toes into scholarly publishing. This email is February 15th, and I know I totally relate to this. Galen's been working on the revisions. He had agreed to that March 18th deadline, but now he's realizing he's just not going to make it, so he asked for an extension. And because WLN is very humane, Ted says, yes, of course, I understand these challenges. How about April 1st? So Gaelen then actually beats the April 1st deadline by a few days. He submits his revision on March 28th. And he wants to thank the reviewers because their feedback was so helpful. And that's something that we really want to highlight, that getting a lot of feedback, especially critical feedback that requires a lot of revisions, can be a little intimidating, but recognize that it's totally normal. And so instead of feeling defensive about your work, if you can think of it as, oh, this is a really cool opportunity to engage with scholars and peers in the field who are just as invested as I am in Writing Center work, then you can see it as a really positive growing experience. And that's exactly what Gaelen did. The next email is April 16th. Ted acknowledges that he got the revisions and he explains the next steps, which is that he's going to send it out again. And you know, the reviewers might ask for more revisions, and those revisions could be major or minor. Then June 9th, Ted gets back and says, okay, yeah, we do need some revisions, but they're minor. Is a July 1st deadline possible? And then, yay, Gaelen is thrilled. He's going to be published. And so let me just recap that whole timeline, because one of the main questions that new authors have is, how long does this whole process take? So Gaelen began that conversation with Muriel Harris in October, and it was around October 25th when he submitted his first manuscript. Ted sent the reader reviews out in January, or he sent the reviews back to Gaelen in January, asked for revisions by March 18th. Gaelen asked for an extension till April 1st, but then submitted the revisions actually on March 28th. Ted accepted with minor revisions on June 9th. Those minor revisions were due July 1st. Gaelen met that deadline, and now Gaelen's manuscript is in the queue. So it should be published soon. We don't know exactly when, but it will be published soon.
All right, so this concludes the presentation portion of our webinar. Before we open up to questions and answers, we want to remind you that you'll be getting an email from us to participate in a survey. Your answers to the survey will be used to help us improve our webinars as well as select topics for future webinars. So please answer our surveys, and thank you very much in advance. Also, if you like this webinar, you may be interested in recordings of our last 3 webinars, which are available on the WLN website. So we'll now be open to your questions, and the way we'll do it is that we're just going to be going through the chat tool and to see what questions you might have. And then Elizabeth will be reading those questions, and then we'll all pitch in terms of answering.
And there's no question that is a silly question.
So do we have questions here?
Not yet. People are coming up with good ones. They want to stump us.
Well, there's at least one group of tutors together I saw in the chat earlier, so maybe they're coming up with group questions.
Don't be shy. And one thing to note too, I think this is the first time we've had so many students be part of this process, so we're very excited, and don't be embarrassed if you're a student to ask any kind of question. I think these are all, we're here to really respond to anything that you might, any questions that you might have.
Okay, so someone says not a question, but just wanted to express my thanks for this great presentation. Thank you. You're welcome. Hi there. I joined the chat a little late, so this question may have been answered already. Are there submission deadlines, or can we send manuscripts on a rolling basis? Oh, that's a great question. And it's a rolling basis. As submissions come in, they are looked at by Muriel Harris, who's the editor-in-chief, and then she sends them out. So there's a constant in and out process going on. And also, I do want to note, and we kind of saw this with the timeline of Gaelen and Ted's interaction through those emails. Just like you all, the editors are really busy at the end of semesters. So Gaelen submitted his manuscript at the end of October, just when things were getting really crazy for the editors, who were also professors. And so that's why it wasn't until January that he got an email back from Ted with the feedback. So just to let you know, you can submit things at any time, and there's no magical time to submit it. But if you submit near the end of the semester, it's probably going to take a little longer to get some feedback. Okay, somebody asked, for the sake of my tutors, can you tell them what you think is different with WLN's process as opposed to other journals?
I think I can answer that question, and you guys are also welcome to chip in. From what I could see, it's very similar, but I think WLN's process for the tutors column is much more supportive, in the sense that I think that they give them far more kind of support and encouragement in terms of the early part of the process. For example, just, in terms of helping them shape the idea. I think the idea of having revision even before review, for example, a very early stage when it's in danger of being perhaps declined, it's an example of how they really, really support student writing, and they know that students have maybe a bigger hurdle just because they're not exposed to scholarly writing process as much as others. So they have a lot more in place I would say, in terms of getting that support. But maybe Elizabeth or Julie, you might want to add to that.
I just wanted to say that one thing that we see in I'm going back to the correspondence between Gaelen and Ted Rogenbach is that, and Ted has said this verbally as well, that the goal at WLN is to publish tutors. I mean, the goal going in is they want to publish your article. So they will do whatever's necessary to help you get to that place if you're able and willing to put in the work and the time to making that article publishable. So I think it's just an approach that is tutor friendly, author friendly, that we don't see sometimes in other prominent journals.
Yeah.
There's another.
We have another question. I would like to know if there is a specific amount of experience that one must have before writing an article for submission. And I would say, I'm not sure if this is asking about experience as a tutor or experience as a scholarly writer. And I would say for either one, there's not a threshold. I think that because WLN is really looking for articles that will be of interest to new tutors as well as experienced ones, sometimes that beginner's mind that you have when you're brand new at something can be really valuable, and you'll have insights that more seasoned people might be immune to because they feel like they've kind of seen it all. And then I'll let Sohui or Julie address if the question is about having more experience as a scholarly writer.
Yeah, I think I read it the same way as you did, but maybe, is it Renee? Renee could clarify that, but I would agree with you that I don't think it doesn't really matter in terms of where that experience lies. But obviously, in terms of writing, though, it's important.
And Renee says she did mean it both ways.
Oh, okay, good. But in terms of writing, like scholarly experience, of course, like, a lot of tutors, as well as like some administrators too, don't have a lot of experience publishing, but that's why we have this webinar, just to kind of give you guidance in terms of what to look out for, looking at models in existing and published works, making sure you have a lit review that's fairly thorough if you need that. Obviously for the Tutors Column, you probably won't need it as much, but certainly some kind of context to understanding what readers may already know about a particular practice, for example, or a situation. So yeah, I think the webinar is set up for people who are just really just launching into that, launching into publication.
I would say, if I can take it, I don't know if this is addressing part of Renee's question as well. I think that you might need a little bit of experience as a tutor first before you have some enough context to write about. I mean, I think one of the things that the sample articles highlight for us is the sense that the tutors have had enough experience working with students and working in a writing center to be able to talk about those experiences with some sense of confidence and authority. And so, but again, there's no benchmark for that. I mean, it might be that you've been working in the Writing Center for a couple of months and you've really dived deep into your work and you're ready to go and you've had experiences that you think would be relevant to other Writing Center tutors. In other cases, it might take you a while where you feel like you've gained enough experience to be able to talk about those experiences in a confident way. So, but I would say a little bit of time on the job would inevitably strengthen and bolster whatever argument you're trying to make.
So don't write a tutor's column based on your first day on the job.
Or write it later.
Right.
After you're reflecting back on that time or something.
So that actually segues into the next question in a way. Do you have to be a current tutor to submit a tutor's column, or can you be a past tutor? Or what if you submit while you're a tutor, but then you are no longer a current tutor at publication time? Is that okay? And the last part of the question is a really easy one to answer. As we said, like with Galen's column, it's in the queue, and we don't really know how long it's going to be. And so if he graduates before it gets printed, it's not like we're going to yank it out of the queue and be like, sorry, Gaelen, you graduated, now you don't get the publication. So as long as you're a tutor, I think it's fair to say that it doesn't matter if you're no longer a tutor at publication time. The first part of the question is a little trickier, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know if they ask if they are currently a tutor, and to publish. I think that it depends on the subject matter, right? So depending on what the subject is, it could be relevant for someone who was a past tutor to be talking about some kind of experience or a scenario or something. So I can't imagine, I mean, I can't speak for the editors, but I can't imagine them ruling it completely out if the person was a tutor and had already graduated but wanted to write about their experience in some way.
Yeah. Okay, the next question asks, can the Tutors Column articles be co-written, or would it be suited for another section of WLN? And yes, they can absolutely be collaboratively written. The next one says, my instinct would be to read every single Tutors Column to make sure I didn't repeat something that's already been said there before submitting a column, but that's not feasible. What do you recommend?
I recommend doing Elizabeth's search, using the search tools that Elizabeth walked us through today too.
Yeah.
Narrowing your scope to trying to figure out what are some keywords or terms, key concepts that your article might deal with, and then narrowing your focus by searching through those keywords and terms in some ways.
I think one thing that people sometimes can do is like procrastinate the actual writing by saying, well, I've got to read one more thing. So it might be a nice idea to read every single Tutors Column that's ever been written. But like you said, that's not feasible. And it's not even really healthy. That's potentially just a way to put off the actual writing of the article. So maybe read 10 of them, you know, set a limit for yourself, read 10 Tutors Columns. If you do repeat something that's already been said, the editors will let you know, the peer reviewers will let you know. And knowing what's already been said and seeing how you can build on it is a really smart way to contextualize what you're doing.
And look, Mickey, she responded.
Yay!
Can write columns after they're no longer tutors, so we're correct.
Yay! Okay.
And Mickey reinforces what we've just said, that it's not feasible, or as Elizabeth said, healthy, for any of us to read every single Tutors Column. As Mickey points out, WLN has been in publication for more than 40 years, so that would be really cumbersome and might be a procrastination tool, as Elizabeth said.
You know, it might be cool, though, to read some Tutors Columns from 30 or 40 years ago and see, you know, how the strategies that were being talked about that many years ago have held up over time, whether it's still in use, whether it's part of your repertoire or not.
Yeah. Interesting article.
Sorry, we're now on asides for the moment. The editors are on aside. I was at an IWCA, International Writing Center Association conference panel last week where someone did that, created a sort of bingo sheet of topics that had been published in Writing Center journals over the last 40 years, and we were supposed to identify which ones were current and which ones were 40 years ago. And it was striking that in some ways we're talking about some of the same topics that we've been talking about since the inception of our journals.
Interesting.
And that's interesting and also maybe disturbing too, right? It's the same thing, right?
Well, and this makes me think back to the quote that I had on the slide from Leanne Glausensky, who is the editor of the Tutors Column, and she talked about the interest in diversity and international perspectives and things like that. So a lot of what was written 30 or 40 years ago would possibly be really different if we saw it through the lenses of today, where we are more interested in and sensitive to diversity and international perspectives. And so actually this project is sounding more and more interesting. I hope someone takes it on.
Someone out there needs to.
Well, it is 1:48 on my clock. Should we wait a few more minutes to see if there's any other questions, or if there aren't any, then
Maybe like just give one more minute. Any other wrap-up questions or comments or anything we can address before we sign off? Did you already do a reminder, Sohui, that?
Yep.
Will be our Thank you. We really enjoyed putting together this particular webinar. We like all of our webinars. Great, friends. But we talked amongst ourselves about how we very much enjoyed the work that of doing this particular webinar. We really believe in tutor support and professionalization, so we hope it helps people.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. And, oh, wait, is there a question there?
Is there any specification for international tutors that would like to write? I'm not sure exactly what that's asking. Are there like special
Different.
requirements that?
If it's asking if there are other specifications or requirements, the answer would be no.
Special requirements. No special requirements. And really WLN is super interested in international perspectives.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, folks. We'll let you get on with your Fridays.
Have a great weekend.
Yes, have a great weekend. Tune in on our WLN blog. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.